came a little early, which is good. So maybe we can start the presentation a little early. I'd ask those of you that are standing up, there's more chairs up here in the front, unless you enjoy standing up. It's up to you. So it's a pleasure to welcome you here tonight, and it's very heartwarming to see all the people in the community that have turned up for this presentation this evening. This is the 34th speaker that the Speakers Bureau has entertained. This is our 5th year now. It makes us all feel good for all this effort and to see you guys getting the word and responding. Recognize, of course, we have a special speaker this evening that transcends all organizations and activities in this village. The Speakers Bureau is sponsored by the rural, I forget what it is. What is it, Jim? Yeah, that's what it is. Which is a nonprofit organization, and we this evening comes to you free. You want to leave it that way, and everything we do is volunteer based. Like the food is cooked by volunteers and served by volunteers. We set up the chairs, we set up the meetings, and we clean up after ourselves. And we do ask if you are inclined. We have donation jars around. We usually suggest that if you could give us $5 for the evening, we'd feel very grateful. The organization was struggling for a while. We put on a big push and we started asking for donations. We just broke even last year, so we want to keep that up this year. I have a couple of housekeeping things. You found an index card sitting on your chair. Those index cards are for questions. Should you want to ask our speaker a question, just if you don't have a pencil, there's some around the room, raise your hand and we'll get you one. But write it down and pass it to our ushers, which will be at the side of the room and up the aisles, so that we can be real organized in asking the questions and not spending time going around so many people. So that's the first one. This presentation is being professionally filmed tonight, and so we. Better? Yeah. So we ask lower. There's a famous joke about lower, but I won't go into that. Okay, the photographer has asked that you do not take pictures during the presentation, and I ask that you turn off your cell phones. So I'm going to give you a minute, find your cell phone. Our last month presentation, a cell phone went off, and the person who owned the cell phone was so embarrassed they would not reach to turn it off, and they just let it ring. So let's don't let that happen again tonight. There are some people, having a conniption about it. So that's our housekeeping. Make sure I got everything included here. There are many activities at the Resource Center, which is up by the barn, as you know. Every week, this week we have 12 different activities going on. A lot of exercise groups. There's events like this evening event. There are lots of classes given in the evening on art, various topics. In fact, I'm thinking about doing a class on sculpting this summer. If you're interested in that, I have a room for 2. Guest speaker tonight doesn't really need an introduction. You all know Dan West, and you all have some relationship with this community. And Dan came here when he was 5 years old with his family. His grandfather had purchased the lumber mill and all the surrounding property in Graeagle. And Dan spent his life working with his dad, creating this mountain paradise. And it never ceases to amaze me what they did here and how different this is from most developments nowadays. It's a remarkable place, and I think most of you would probably feel the same way. Dan is going to share with us some of his memories of growing up and working with his dad to achieve the results which you see every day in Graeagle. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dan West.
Thank you, Dick. I'm gonna need water. You just said everything I have on here. Dick duped me into doing this, and up to an hour and a half ago, I thought I was still at the resource center. I thought, well, how bad can that be? I gotta get 50 people in there. So I go by to the mailbox an hour and a half ago, and I see Debbie and Dick's car here, and I get on the phone to Leah, and I go, why is Debbie and Dick's car at the fire hall? So I don't really like speaking in front of folks, and Dick asked me to say a little bit about growing up in Graeagle, and I'm not going to go too long into it, but I was going to start off, and he already said it, in 1958, I moved here with my mom and dad and my sister, and we lived in one of the red houses up on the hill across from the store. We call it Lucy's house, and I'll tell you that why a little bit later. Everybody says we moved here, but actually, according to my mom, we were sent here. And so,
Yeah. Hold the microphone up.
can't hear me?
A little closer, yeah.
Damn. You know, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and ask a question. That'd probably be the easiest way, or you can write it down. I probably won't be able to read it. But you can ask questions. I don't care. A little bit about my grandfather, who was quite a unique individual, and I should be writing a book about him. I haven't. But, you know, he was quite a guy. He started as a mechanic in a garage and in Capitola. Is that better?
Yeah.
And back then, cars were just coming out, so he stored your car and he put gas in your car, and when you wanted to go out on a Sunday drive, you came and got your car, and that's how it worked. And he had an old Packard car that he cut the cab off of it, and he put a chain drive on the back, and he started hauling lumber for Santa Cruz Lumber Company out of Fulton, down to the port in Santa Cruz at the time when they were still hauling lumber out of there. And from there, then he started getting more and more trucks, and so he had a fleet of old Mack trucks that he hauled lumber from Fulton to Santa Cruz, and then he branched out a little bit. I'm not going to go on too long about my grandfather, but he was a unique individual to do what he did back then, and eventually moved up onto Highway 50, where he went to work for Sacramento Box, hauling lumber for them down to Sacramento. They were in financial trouble. They couldn't pay him. He ended up with a mill. He didn't know what to do with it, but he got it. And anyway, as he went on, he ended up with 4 mills along Highway 50, and he built one in Lake Tahoe. And so he was in the timber industry, logging right from falling the tree, making it into lumber and selling it. And of course, he hit it at the right time, for the war, when they needed lumber, and right after the war, when everybody came home and was building new homes and stuff. So he did quite well. He never acted that way. He lived in a 1,400 square foot house, and he wasn't flamboyant at all that way, but he did like to drink and carouse and had many girlfriends. But anyway, but a unique guy. And so when he was in Highway 50, one of the guys that had a lot of mills that were in competition with him was a guy by the name of Setzer, and he was more down in the valley. And they kind of had this gentleman's agreement. You don't bid on the sale up where I am, and I won't bid on any sales close to you. Well, he bid on a sale right next to my grandpa. It made him so mad he sold everything and quit. And it was kind of unique. So anyway, he tried to buy where North Star is today, and that was all the fiberboard property, the town of Truckee, and about 75,000 acres of timberland around Truckee. And he had it all bought for $365,000. Had an accepted offer on it, and Bank of America wouldn't give him the loan. And so he got real mad about that anyway. Through his connections in the timber industry, he did find out that there was this mill up in this little town of Graeagle that was for the California Fruit Exchange was going to sell, because they got mad when cardboard came out, right? Anyway, so he found out about that, and he sent my dad and my uncle up here in 1957 in the summer, and they drove up in a little pickup in their logging clothes. And the guy, Herb Rowe, who ran the mill, he said, "Who are these guys? They don't have a dime." He goes, "They're not going to do it." Well, anyway, the two boys finally talked to Herb, and they made a deal, and they bought Graeagle. And it's my grandfather that bought it, but it was interesting. He always, I think our family's always given us leeway to think and go out on our own a little bit. So he gave leeway to them. And my mom thought it'd be Bob that came up here, but Bob had to have none of that. So it was actually, my dad was sent up here, and I think Dad kind of wanted to do that. I think most of this has been Dad's vision. My grandfather had the vision, wanted to do that, but he actually sold Graeagle in the mid-60s and didn't tell my dad. But what was interesting, they still needed his signature. Because he was one of the partners in Placerville Lumber Company that actually bought it, and he wouldn't sign. And so he put an end to that. Buyers went away, and that was it. He pretty much after that, he told him, "You leave me alone, I'll take care of this." Anyway, so that's kind of just a little sidebar. I don't want to talk too much about myself. A little bit about my dad. He was just a smart guy, never cared too much about money, and just wanted to live here. And one of the questions I saw Dick had written down was, why was this a vision? How did you know to do this? And it was pretty easy. If you want to live here, you don't want to screw it up. You'd like to live in a place you enjoy. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And anyway, and Dad, much to my grandfather's dismay, went to college, which he didn't want him to do because he didn't see any reason for it. They were very busy. They had the mills all going. But my dad drove a logging truck right to Sacramento Junior College and signed up. So, and then along came the war, and they sent him to COP, went to college there, and then they sent him to Harvard. So when he came out of Harvard, he came out as a lieutenant and was in the war as a lieutenant supply officer, which he always told the stories, and he always carried $200,000 with him all the time because he paid everybody in cash, right? On about 3 different ships out in the Pacific. But anyway, it just goes to that. And I thought, and he had a vision here, and he loved it here. And he always liked timber, and he liked golf, and he liked baseball, and he liked fishing. And so the fishing and everything was here, and he really did enjoy that. I don't really care for fishing, but he really did. And baseball, of course, he played baseball for the college in Sacramento. He was very good at it. My grandfather had 2 different teams for the Placer League. It's actually the Placer Foothill League that sent a lot of players to the Sacramento Solons and stuff. And I remember in 1964, the World Series, Dad knew 2 of the players in the World Series, so we went. We didn't have tickets, we didn't have rooms, but we went. And it was funny, if you remember Stu Nahan, did anybody remember Stu Nahan? So he's on the plane, And Dad starts talking to him, because he was Captain Sackville, right? Everybody knew Captain Sackville. And damn if he didn't get him 2 tickets. And he got us somehow into a room in one of the hotels in St. Louis. And I remember going with Dad out. He went out scalping tickets so he could get 2 more. So and we were downtown Santa Cruz, kind of a bad part. And anyway, he bought a couple more tickets. Sure enough, we went to the World Series. And that was enjoyable. That's a little story I wanted to tell you. But he really did enjoy it. And all these mill towns had baseball fields, and they had baseball teams, and some of them were awful good. Graeagle had teams. They had a ball diamond. It always faced the wrong way, so the first things Dad did is move the ball diamond, right? Because when you were batting, the sun was right in your eyes. So it was out in right field today, and we moved it to where it is today. But anyway, a little bit about my young life. So when we moved here, I've lived a unique life, right? I could ride my bicycle anywhere I wanted. Nobody cared. And if I had friends with me, we went anywhere. Well, this was a pretty self-sufficient town, but all the infrastructure had run down. The power wasn't working, the water really wasn't working. None of that stuff was really going. So Dad immediately got to work doing that, and he started improving some of that as it went. But that's why there were hardly anybody here when we first moved. Let's face it, there's no power, and there was very little water. Unless you went out and cleaned the screens, and then you could get water until they plugged again a few hours later. And then there wasn't, just all that infrastructure. So like where we lived, the only heat was radiator heat. So they had an old steam line that ran by the gas station today over the highway and up to those houses on the hill. And so I remember I slept next to a radiator half my life, and it's always going off. And and if any of you've been by a radiator, they're pretty noisy. Anyway, so that was one of the. I was just trying to sit here and go over thoughts that were unique just growing up here, and that happened to be one of them. Anyway, we could go anywhere and play. We went to the mill, which wasn't very safe. That didn't matter. And we would go play in the restaurant, because back then it had been just a cafeteria with the old sliders for the trays and stuff. Well, we could play around in there, and there's a movie theater next to it, which is a dance hall that you folks know. But there was a rather big concrete projection room with the old burning arc projector up there, which was, kids, we thought that was pretty cool. You could get in trouble. And I always tell everybody, we used to go up to the slaughterhouse, because as being a self-sufficient town, they had everything. They had the old dairy, but they had a slaughterhouse. Well, as kids, they had the hooks that took the meat all the way through the building as they processed it. They came out the other side, obviously dead and cut into pieces. But as kids, you could grab all those hooks and just go all the way through the building. It was really fun. We did that all. And you could really get going fast, because it was all. Anyway. Big into the Cub Scouts. My mom was our Cub Scout leader, and she did a great job. She's always had us kids going all over the place, doing crazy things. But anyway, it was more of a community effort. And I'm kind of drifting off here. I was just thinking of different things, like the Graeagle store, which it was operating when we came. And the guy there was Gordon Laird. And many of you may know the Lairds. Does anybody remember the Lairds? Yeah. Well, there were 3 brothers. It was Gordon, Dick, and Larry. They became good friends of Mom and Dad. They had a bowling team, right? That was great, the bowling team. And they were always trying to beat that Portola guys. Big deal, but Gordon, he lived in a little house right across from the store that's not even there anymore, but he was always pretty well soused when he went there. But as a young kid, we went there for the Cokes, because they had the machine, you had to get it and go all the way through all the things, and then finally got it out, But anyway, it was a lot of fun. All those little unique memories that you think of. My dad gave me a Mack truck to drive down here I was not very old. But I could figure it out. I got it running, got it going. I'd drive all around the old mill. I couldn't leave the mill aside, though. But anyway, it ended up at the Plymouth County Fair, and I don't know what happened to it after that. It was there for a long time. I couldn't tell you. I have to say, through life, the schools in Portola were really offered a lot to me, and I think we were fortunate to have some of the best teachers in the world, and the school was good. I mean, it was a neat place to go, and I hope it can from what I hear, I hope it gets better in the future. But it was sure neat when I was a kid, and they took care of you. And one of the main guys that worked for Dad when he first came here was B.G. Vernazza, and he'd worked for the mill a long time. He knew all about the town, so Dad hired him. He lived in one of the houses on the hill. But his wife cooked at the cafeteria at the school, and he and Clara Knapp would fix us, and I know you remember, you're sitting there shaking your head. They'd fix the best lunches in the world. I mean, it was all hot, chicken pot pie, you name it. It was all the best. It was really good food. And I just always felt fortunate as kids. And we always had the same bus driver, because back then we actually had 2 buses coming to Graeagle. We don't have the kids here that we used to have, or they all get driven, I guess. But we always had to run down the hill, catch a bus, away we went. But Jim Burton was always our bus driver, and he would stop the bus and kick you off. And then you'd just be standing there. And maybe that's what we don't have today, that discipline. I mean, we were pretty scared of him, to be honest with you. I remember later on in life, we went to a basketball game in Westwood, and snow was, we went through a tunnel to get into the gymnasium in Westwood. They got a ton of snow. We were coming back on the Greenville Hill. It's snowing like crazy, and Jim's driving. We got to put chains on. He just stopped the bus open and says, "All ready out, and you're putting the chains on. I'm not doing it." Can you imagine him telling kids today to do that? We all did. We all were down there putting the chains on. It was, anyway, it was great. And
Child abuse.
summers, we always spent time at Gold Lake, and Gordon Laird had the store at Gold Lake. I don't know how many of you knew there was a store at Gold Lake. And it was pretty neat, actually. And when he left there, then he came down here. I had the opportunity to go with any employee I wanted to. So if they were doing a big job, and I was a little kid, I'd just go with them. So I learned a lot just watching them. We'd be out in the woods if we were building roads out there, or in town if they were rebuilding a building, or whatever we were doing. I was usually hanging around. And learned a lot from those folks. And I'd go with Dad and learned a lot. Dad was always hauling stuff. We hauled a lot of rock out to Lake Davis when they were building the dam out there. And all those areas, Clover Valley. One of the things we did on certain Sundays, we got to go to the Feather River Inn. And the Feather River Inn was really la-ti-da, and Leah said I should go ahead and use the word like la-di-effin-da. But it was cool. And just to tell you, when you sat around the pool, they delivered sandwiches in tuxedos and white gloves. And like a sandwich was $5, right? And this is back in the 50s. So it was just a unique, very, very high-end, classy place. And it was neat. We didn't go there often, but we were invited to go Sundays. Dad got to know Favetto a little bit, and so we could go there and at least sit around the pool and enjoy a Sunday there. And it was really enjoyable as kids, because that pool, it was a huge pool. It was a lot of fun. I'd have to say the ski hill around here, I started learning to ski at about 6. The teachers would all take us up there. We'd have 2 buses of students go up there early in the morning Saturday. They'd keep us all day, went through classes, gave us tests, and sent us home after lunch. And I mean, it was just a neat place to learn to ski. And I know a lot of you kids over here, younger, older guys, we all learned to ski there. It was neat. A great program for the kids. I'm just going to mention a few friends, because I had, they were kind of few and far between back when I first came there, but right behind our house, Burke South lived there. So we'd hang around. It was Burke South and down west. So it was kind of and we would always ride our bikes together. And another good friend was Donnie Mason, and his dad was Jack Mason. Jack Mason was the ranger up at the Johnsville Park there. And Jack he was great. He'd let Donnie and I run around the park all we wanted, and then we usually stay at the house. In the winter, they stayed in the house that the tree just went through. You know, in Johnsville, a year ago or 2 years ago, that big tree, that was their house. And then in the summer, they stayed in the summer house, which is still there. It's up above, kind of that one with the French doors on it in the back. And I'm telling you this to get to a story, but Don had a pet deer, Spooky. And that deer would come right upstairs. Don's bedroom was upstairs, and he'd sleep with us in the bed. And in the summer, he'd walk out and bum cigarettes off the cars because he loved to eat cigarettes. Off the filters. But in the evening, when I was staying with Donnie, I'm not going to go there, but I can tell you, those places were haunted up there. And that stamp mill was one of the scariest places in the world. And when you went there at night as young boys, and you heard noises, and you heard footsteps up in the rafters, we'd be back in his bedroom before, we didn't know how we got there. And the old hotel we used to go in now, it was a 3-story hotel right about where Jeff Long built his house across the iron door. That place we could get into and walk through, and by the time you got to the 3rd floor, you were so scared you could hardly get back down and get out because you heard every little noise. Anyway, we had a great time. Donnie was a great fisherman. I never went with him, but and a great skier. But his dad is actually the one that told my dad. He said, you know, those flagpoles from the Olympics, the '60 Olympics, are for sale. You want to buy them? So I remember Dad telling my grandfather, buy 3 of them. You know, so. We do. The one in the park came from the 1960 Olympics. The one down in Harvey West Park in Santa Cruz came from the Olympics. And the one at the high school in Placerville, El Dorado High, Bennett Field, there's one of those there too. So anyway, they were always kind of unique. When they delivered them all, you know, kind of it was a big deal. They came in, put it all up. But also the Lairds, and I already mentioned the Lairds, but they had 2 boys, Emmett and Ricky, and we'd always, you know, we always were playing together or going on Cub Scout trips. I mean, Dad took us all the way to the top of Pimlin Peak. But it was a great place to grow up anyway. Had a lot of fun.
Still is.
So some of my jobs, I was going to just go, one thing we've done just about everything, but when we first got here, my sister and I ran the driving range, and we get 10 cents for picking a bucket. Well, on some days wasn't too bad, but we'd spin them all next door at Monahan's because she had the Frosty and they made the best ham hamburger. So all you did is just pick balls so you could go eat those hamburgers. When we first came, the water to get to there was a wooden flue that took the water to the top of the penstock and dropped it into the powerhouse. And of course, it was all in disarray, so they had to keep it going. So a tree had fallen, it break it, whatever. So we were always going up there. And I remember I went up to BG and Dad, I'm young, and we're in BG. We had a 4-wheel drive truck, which was kind of rare back then, just to get up there. And in his glove box was some Copenhagen. So I decided to try that. I was sick for a week, and I was, that's a funny story because they came back from working on the flue, and I'm sitting there blue on the ground. I can't hardly breathe, and BG knew what it was right away. There was no garbage service in Graeagle, so we hauled the garbage for everybody here in town, and so I would work on the garbage truck. And you could tell the people that fished because the garbage really smelled. I mean, it really smelled. And we just dumped it in a dump truck, right? We didn't have the... So we dumped it in the dump truck, we'd go dump it. You know, I was young, I was just helping more or less, but I did have a job because every 2 weeks we burned the dump. So we're just dumping it over by where the condos are now, where all you people live over there. Anyway, every 2 weeks we burned it, even in the summer. But my job was to put out the burning squirrels when they came out of it. So you just had a big shovel, and as they came out of there, you whacked them. And then put out the fire, because they would set fires away from the... And there were a number of us doing that. I also, when they started building the golf course, the first thing they did was start planting trees out there, so my job was to go water them. So as a little kid, I got to take the fire truck, go out there and water the trees. I had to do that once a week, and it became a pretty good sized job, but it was a lot of fun because I got to drive, right? So that's always cool. And I got the fire truck. But anyway, talking about the fire, you know, the fire department is so important to this community and to any community. And volunteerism is so important, and I can't say enough for our volunteers here in Graeagle. I went on my first fire when I was 14. It was a bunkhouse that burned, caught fire and burned because kids were probably smoking in there. But I got to know those kids later, but that's all right. That was my dark side. But that fire, those flames were 200 feet in the air, and we lived just 2 houses from it, right? So I can remember taking a fire hose and holding it on there all day long, and it never even changed color. So that's how hot. This is a 3-story building about 120 feet long. And when it was burning, I mean, I'm not kidding you, I've never seen anything that hot. And so anyway, that was my first fire experience. And of course, anybody that worked for Dad back then was on the fire department, and we had an old siren behind the store, and when that rang, everybody ran down there and got it, right? First guy had to run down and ring the siren, push the button. And then later on, we moved to the siren behind the houses because people were branching out a little bit, and they could hear that. And of course, today it's so nice having these pagers. But we owe a lot to the fire department. I mean, and we never used to do the medical end of it. And that takes a lot of time, effort, and training for these guys to do that. And I know because I went through it all, but I just can't say enough about it. We used to put a town Christmas tree out in the park before we planted that one, and the reason we planted that one is because Steve O'Neill and I went out to cut a Christmas tree for the town. That was our job that day. And we had a cherry picker, big boom truck, let the trees down. So we hooked the tree up to it, sawed the tree down, and the tree went that way instead of that way. So the whole truck went over. So the whole truck's outside, and we have to walk, right, because we have no other vehicle. And Dad's having lunch in their house there, and we walk in, we got these long faces, and well, we took the truck over. That wasn't a good day. He actually laughed, he didn't care too much. One of my next jobs was making potato salad at the golf course for Louise Elliott, her husband Denver was our first pro. And anyway, she had this recipe for potato salad that was just wonderful, and I wish I could duplicate it, but I have tried and I can't. Then I worked at Chevron the next day, and that was for Remo Lando, and he was a great guy. That station was spotless, John. Spotless. Just saying. And after that, I worked in the golf course for many summers. And I can remember the job would be rake the 18th fairway. You know, so we'd start and rake the 18th fairway by hand because there was no machines that did that back then. Anyway, I'm not going to go much longer. I met my wife, Leah, 46 years ago at the Feather River Inn. She was singing at the bar there. And they had a band that was really good, by the way. And they went all over the county. And back then, this is a long time, 46 years, right? They'd make $800 a night. And they could play anywhere, and they got so good at it. So anyway, I met her that night. She was singing, because she was a new girl in town. That was like the new Gino. And the next night, she was playing at Gino's, which is Goomba's now, but back then it was Gino that owned it. And his son was in the band too, so they always played at Gino's quite a bit. So I went and picked her up and took her home. That was the end of that story. We've been together ever since. Never regretted a day of it in my life. Smart comment. anyway, this is a great place to grow up, and it's a great place for my children to grow up. And like I said before, I think it's because you want to live here, you don't want to screw it up. I'm always amazed at how the state of California will not give you any credit for doing anything right. So, you know, if we wanted to screw it up, we could have done that. And I guess everything's in the eye of the beholder. I'd be glad to answer questions. I don't have much else. I'm looking through my notes. I'm sure I missed some stuff. I was trying to think of some of the neat stories I had. Oh, you know, I will tell you one thing. So when I got to learn to drive, I had a pretty hot car, and I'd take people home after school. And I'd drop them off there. It was usually girls and stuff. I'd drop them off, and then I'd go back. And I had an Oldsmobile 442. It was pretty cool. I get home, and Highway Patrol's waiting, having coffee with my mom in the living room, and he's already written my ticket. Because I wasn't going to bother you, but here's your ticket. Of course, my mom chews me out, but it cracked me up. They're having coffee, chatting away, and I got the ticket. Any questions?
How many people were in your school in Portola when you graduated?
I graduated 35 students in my class. But classes changed quite a bit. Every year was quite a bit different. Even our kids, one of them had 80, and I think one of them had 45 or something. Yeah, so it varied from year to year. Yes, Larry?
So I guess I just want to make a comment on you and Leah. Since she was the new girl in town and she was a singer, it probably would be fair to say that you married up, Dan?
I kept her from being famous. You know how miserable that would have been. She really was good. She'd come out in roller skates and sing the roller skate song, pigtails, stuff on her face.
So next month she's gonna entertain?
No. You can get her to.
Dan, when did you start building homes in this area?
Well, we never built any homes. The only ones we ever built were the last 16 condos. But Dad built the first subdivision in '59, so we only been here a year. And by the way, are you a supervisor, Jeff? So it took him less than a year to get all the permits and build it. Anyway, politics, I'll stay out there. Yeah, so right away at 59 he started, I mean, all he did is ever sell lots. Those lots sold for about $1,900 a piece.
And you had a limit.
14 a year usually is what he'd sell. Some years were a little
Did you
different.
say that house up at Jonesville was Jack Mason's at one time?
Well, it was the state parks. So
Yeah, the maintenance supervisor. So my mom and dad lived there for 20 years, and my dad was maintenance supervisor, and it's true that upstairs was so haunted. Really creepy. Yeah.
Well, Donnie was not afraid of anything, so he would take us, we'd go into the museum, and we had the keys, but even he would get scared at some point. I mean, it was something. Yep.
What year did you graduate from high school?
71.
Thank
Why does that mean anything? Just wanted to make sure I graduated. Yes, sir.
Yes, how old was your grandfather to purchase Graeagle? And also your father, how old was he?
Dad was about 34. My grandfather, I'm not sure. He would have been probably about 65, somewhere in there. I'm not sure. I'd have to do the math. But Dad was 34 when he moved up here. Yes?
I've heard that your grandfather had a connection to talk over real estate, and that somehow that he parlayed that into Graeagle. Is that, what's that about?
Well, I wouldn't call it parlaying it, but so we built a mill in Lake Tahoe. He did. Or what's this thing?
There you go.
Better? You writing this down?
I don't want to misquote you.
Well, I don't want to be quoted. One thing that might be nice is if, I'm not going to swear to any of these facts, because my mind's been so bad I can't remember anything. So. Lake Tahoe, well, when you bought the timber, from the Forest Service, you got the land with it. That's how it went for years. And then they started charging $1 an acre, and everybody thought that was highway robbery. I don't know how to turn it. Is that better?
Yeah.
So yeah, he had a lot of land around Lake Tahoe, all where Heavenly Valley is. Traded all that for Emerald Bay. So he owned Emerald Bay, the whole thing, subdivided, and it's always been a sore subject for me because the state took it from him and he never really got credit for it. And so, and they took it by just taking the taxes from what was somewhat reasonable, probably back then $15,000 to about $150,000 in 1 year. And he just said, take it. And so because of that, he never really got full credit for giving that away. But yeah, so he was pretty well connected with Lake Tahoe. I've got pictures of the boats there, and we used to stay in the one bedroom that had the round in the castle. And yeah, pretty neat. There was multiple speedboats there, and my grandfather got drunk one time and went screaming around there and showing off and hit a wave and landed on the beach. Anyway, it was a unique place, yeah.
Is there a story involved with the highway patrol car on US 50 east of Fosterville that a lot of us passed by many times before any of us knew Graeagle existed? Is there a story involved with that?
Well, there probably is, yeah. A lot of stories. My grandfather was a big supporter of CHP. He's the one that put all the cars along the road, the signs up and everything else. And that's because I was just looking today at a picture at Emerald Bay in this boat, and these guys are drinking cocktails, and they're driving up, we both have cocktails, and it's my grandfather, and it's Brewster, who is head of the Highway Patrol. First head of the California Highway Patrol, and they're up there drinking at Tahoe. So, but my grandfather's brother Lowell ran for sheriff at El Dorado County, and so he was sheriff, and he has nothing to do with Highway Patrol, but he also was a member down at Del Paso in Sacramento. So here he is, sheriff, and he'd go stay at Del Paso down there playing golf and drinking all day, and then he'd go screaming home with the lights and siren on to get home. So dad is sitting there, he's coming back from, I think, Santa Cruz, he said, and this car goes by, lights and siren goes on, so dad finished his meal, and he starts driving along. He gets up there, and here's this car on its side, the lights are still going, and Lowell's climbing out of it, his ears all cut off and hanging down here. He just goes, call Brewster, because we knew Brewster, right? So he only ran for one term, and that's all he done. And the story goes that it's because it was a new sheriff's car, and this was during the war. They didn't have very many, and they weren't happy with him. Supervisors, he was history. Yes?
I'm just curious about the name Graeagle and the history of the spelling and how it came to be that name.
There's been a lot of different, the one I hear that I go by is that the creek, and although the sign says Graeagle Creek, it's actually Graeagle Creek, just like the lodge up above us. And it was just a young girl that worked, her dad worked for the mill, and she just said, let's just take the Y out and put them together. And that was the story the Rose gave us for naming the town.
Long Lake is the potable water for the Graeagle area. Who was responsible for building that dam up there so many years ago?
The mill, Graeagle Lumber, that was there when we came. It was kind of in disarray, and we still do a lot of maintenance to it, but that was all part of, Graeagle Lumber Company had the water rights to Long Lake.
They actually constructed that dam up there.
They did. In fact, I've got all the drawings, not only the drawings, but an engineer of the whole lake and the lake levels for the dam. And that was a guy by the name of Flanagan, Jim Flanagan. I don't know you guys hear the name, but Jim Flanagan was around here famous. He was a supervisor for a while, he was county engineer for a while, and he worked for the mill, and he engineered all the railroads that the mill put out into the woods, all the trestles. They did all that in-house with their own people, and Jim Flanagan engineered it all.
It had nothing to do with mining or anything like that.
No, no.
Thank you.
Where do you see Graeagle going to? I mean, do you have a vision of where you would like to see as time goes on? Stay the same or just morph into something else?
Well, we'd like to see it stay the same. Obviously, it has to grow a little bit. And what changes is how much, it's all a matter of money. In the summer right now, we have 75 employees, and my payroll is about $160,000 a month. So when you look at what comes in and what doesn't come in, that's what's happened. I mean, you just have to keep going, and I would hope we can keep going in the future. The golf course used to subsidize the whole town. We made a ton of money. We're barely breaking even on it. It's nobody's fault. It's just that not that many people play golf like they used to. And a lot of the things that people do today, bike riding and stuff, I mean, we derive nothing from that. So we have to get creative and find other ways too. And I think that's the same. I think we want to see the town grow a little bit. We need that to a point. I think we all do. Yes, sir.
And when we first moved here, we bought a VCR tape of the old mill operation that was at the Graeagle store. Is that still available or?
I don't know, Steve.
No,
So-
I think he moved away.
That was a 20-minute tape, and at home I've got the 10 hours of it. And it's really unique to watch. I mean, it went from the logging all the way through. It's funny, my grandfather, he did a color tape of us logging up by Lake Tahoe. So I don't know why they wanted to do that, but we do have some pretty neat films. And but that one, they took that and they took excerpts out of it and made it 20 minutes, and that was a pretty neat tape. There's a few of them floating around. They're all VHS.
Yeah.
But they could be copied.
We bought one. I'm just curious. It's such a interesting thing. I just thought it'd be more available to the citizens that live here.
Yeah.
If we could reproduce it or something.
If we ever have we thought about doing some kind of museum and having that tape, rolling through would be kind of neat. Yes.
Anyway, Graeagle is a gift of a lifetime, but I've heard stories about all the little houses in town, that they weren't built there, they were brought from somewhere else. Is that true? Was that all of them?
Just almost all of them, yes, came in by rail from what was the old Davies Mill. And if you look at all of them, you'll see where they had there's a board going down the center of them where they were cut in half, put on rail and brought here for places for people to stay. There was a lot of 4,000 people I think worked here, so there's quite a few people here. And then all of them have been added on to, right? And whoever lived there could just go to the mill, get whatever lumber they wanted, and go add on. So there was no engineering. So there's literally some of those are built 2x4s on their side, 2 feet apart, and they went through the winter of '52. So pretty amazing. Nope.
Diane's question got me to thinking, what are the prospects for the Feather River Inn? I know she'll have owns it, ever becoming a real destination resort. To me, that could be an anchor for so much of the economy up here. Is anything happening on that?
Nothing I know of. I don't know. I'm sure it will. It's today it's so expensive to do. I don't think people realize what it costs to do any of this. Yes.
What are your plans for that area south of Graeagle proper that you have, that you built some kind of, you've thinned the trees and so forth?
Well, there's a new subdivision there that's never been opened. The roads are all in now and it's finished. It's just sitting there. There's been no market for lots. So, we're not going to sell them at a lot.
Okay, so nothing, in the near future at this point?
Well, that's finished. That's in the near future. As soon as the economy gets to a point where we can sell a lot, we'll do it. But, you know, those lots cost us somewhere around $80,000 a piece. So when lots are selling for 50 around here, that's not happening. So there's only 99 lots there, and they're all 3/4 of an acre or bigger. So they're kind of a nice deal. All the water's in, they're all approved. They're done. But all our property around here is zoned for different things, and across the road or is zoned for multiple residential if you wanted to do it. A lot of it's zoned for commercial. There's a lot of things that can happen here. It's just that we haven't. I can't say we haven't chose to, but it's too expensive. And our philosophy has always been don't sell, keep everything. We haven't sold anything. We've sold lots to folks here, and we sold some property for the condos, and we sold the post office, and we gave them the property here. So that's about all we've ever given away. I mean, to be honest. That may change, and it'll be out of my hands. That'll be in Harvey III's hands.
Are you planning to build like a resort as well? If they
We've always had plans to build a resort, but yeah, no, not really. Yep.
Ken, across the street from the dairy is what appears to be an old building pad or foundation. Do you recall what might have been there earlier?
It was a big white house, and it was actually a stage stop. If you go to the county museum down there, there's a whole story on that. That's a pretty neat deal. Yeah, it was one of the older buildings here.
So it would have been obviously prior to the building.
Well, that road was kind of one of the main roads, so that was on the main stage stop. When it came through, that road went on down Quincy that way and on up to Fort Fuller from there. But, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Dan, as probably others here have had the same experience, I had the pleasure of going to a Boy Scout camp growing up in the Sacramento area called Camp Harvey West. And I'm just curious, the history of that. Are you aware of how that all came to be?
It was Echo Lake.
Right.
And it was a lake my grandfather purchased and gave it to the Boy Scouts and built the camp for him.
Okay.
He did a lot of that stuff. I mean, his favorite thing was to sit up at the Jerry Lewis telethon and wait until midnight and then make the biggest bid. And in his office, he had trophies. You know, Jerry Lewis gave him all these trophies because you had the highest giveaway. He did a ton of that. But Echo Lake, we hear more about that. More kids enjoyed that as Boy Scouts. They really did. And, you know, he built a park in Santa Cruz, which is still going today, which is pretty popular too. Yep.
About 30 years ago, I was a fire lookout on Mills Peak, and I always appreciate, it rained a lot up there, it was lighting. I was always moving buckets around, water, hardly a roof. And I always remember, I think it was your dad came up, saw that, about 3 days later I had a roof. Came up, put it on.
You know who measured that roof to put the shingles on? And by the way, it was a windy day, and I'm up on that railing. And we painted it and put a roof on it.
That was you?
Yeah, and he just wanted to see that, you know, he thought it was so important, and I still do today. Of course, today they have newer technologies, but it's still important, I think, to our area.
Yeah, it was important to me because
Well, if there's nothing else, yep.
She can go, I already asked you.
When you were young and had moved here, were some of the high lakes operating at that time?
Elwell was going. Markers can tell you those guys were up and running, right? And I think Graeagle Lodge was.
It started in 1920.
1920. So yeah, you guys are well going. Was Gold Lake Lodge here too?
Oh,
Yeah.
Gold Lake
So,
Lodge was started in 1920.
so yeah, most of them were going up there.
The Graeagle Lodge will be, I think, going into our 95th season this year.
There you go.
Are your children
Well, my son works for us here, he's right in the middle of it. And, yeah, I got sick and he went and bought White Hawk.
What?
Anyway, my daughters, they all love it and they all come back and they love being here. And I hope someday my daughters come too. Both live in San Francisco and they're pretty busy down there. So I don't know when they'll come back, but yes, they're all passionate about it. This is still owned by the other side too. So my Uncle Bob's family owns half as well as we do. And they're not as passionate about it, but they've been very good. And so we own this together. It isn't just us. You have questions? Good.
Thank you.
I came to my office 2 days ago, and it was 85 degrees, and it stayed that way all day. By the end of the day, I thought, you know, I bet Dan's doing this to get even with me. So he told me that, it'll be 125 tomorrow.